Welcome to the final episode of the Sustainable Finance web series. During the past four episodes, I have shared some insights on several EU initiatives which are intended to accelerate the transition towards a climate neutral economy. Let me start by highlighting the main takeaways for you. In the first episode, we touched upon the EU's flagship initiative called the EU Green Deal, which aims to transform the entire economy and society with a wide range of policy initiatives. It's a multi-level, multi-stakeholder effort which will change the key systems that define the way we live, work, produce, and consume. Afterwards, we discussed the EU Sustainable Finance Package. It combines a set of legislative packages which intend continued support of economic growth, increased transparency, and clarifying activities labeled as sustainable. In the end, it will benefit those stakeholders whose behaviors support the transition to a carbon neutral economy. A crucial part of the sustainable finance package is the EU taxonomy, which we discussed in the third episode. This classification tool is a sort of encyclopedia of economic activities with a direct material impact on climate change mitigation and transition, providing assessment criteria and logic to direct investment toward projects and activities which support the objectives of the EU Green Deal. It has the purpose to eliminate greenwashing, where companies market activities or investments as sustainable without actually making a material sustainable impact. The EU taxonomy will benefit and impact everybody within the EU, but is only mandatory to a limited number of companies. Nevertheless, as a company, you should be ready to provide answers to the taxonomy's requirements, as your capital providers will reach out to you for data and information. In the last episode, we discussed CSRD, or the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It will replace the current non-financial reporting directive, impacting 4 times more companies with mandatory disclosure of detailed sustainability-related information, and with the objective to bring sustainability reporting to the next level across the EU, ensuring investors, consumers, policymakers, and other stakeholders are provided with the financial and non-financial data they need to assess a company's societal and environmental impacts. It will also help small and medium-sized companies to become more attractive to capital providers through better disclosure requirements. It provides more accessible, in-depth, and verifiable data, allowing for improved ESG decision-making. It will impact all companies operating in the EU, which meets 2 out of the 3 following requirements: 40 million euro turnover, 20 million euro in assets, and/or 250 or more employees. The rollout will happen in 3 big phases. Companies already subject to the NFRD will have to comply with CSRD in their annual reports of the financial year 2024. Large companies currently not subject to NFRD need to comply for their annual reports of financial year 2025. And last but not least, listed SMEs need to be CSRD compliant for their annual reports of the financial year 2026. And what about non-European companies? Well, those with branches or subsidiaries within the EU will have to start reporting under CSRD for their annual reports of financial year 2028. But what does that mean if we put everything on a high-level implementation timeline? Well, as you can see, it seems very long, even light years. But actually, it's just around the corner, and that's also the common pitfall for new and upcoming legislation. Waiting for the detailed reporting requirements is not the solution. You can and should start preparing already today. And this gets me to the topic of this final episode. And let's not wait for the dust to settle, but let's start taking action today. So let's have a look at those actions. Let's call them no regret moves you can take today, which will prepare you for the world of tomorrow. But probably the most common question I hear is, where do I start? Well, let me help you. Let's start with the basics, understanding your company's stakeholders and material topics. But what is a stakeholder exactly? Well, a stakeholder is every entity or individual that can be expected to be significantly impacted by your company's activities, products, and/or services, or every entity or individual whose actions can affect the ability of your company to implement its strategies and achieve its objectives, such as employees, shareholders, capital providers, suppliers, trade unions, customers, NGOs, local communities, the government, and I'm sure you can think about dozens more. Engaging with your stakeholders is crucial, and it can actually have a vast array of potential benefits. It provides a different perspective on your strengths and weaknesses. It may help you identifying risks before they even occur. It might have a positive influence on your reputation. And if your approach to stakeholder engagement is structured and repeated, it will contribute to ongoing learning. But maybe the most important one is engaging with your stakeholders will help you identifying material topics. A material topic is one that is important enough to report on and which will help you guide decision making, such as strategy setting, goals, and KPIs. But it can also guide investment and resource allocation decisions. Basically, it reflects your company's significant economic, environmental, and/or societal impacts. A material topic is defined on two axes. One is the influence it has on stakeholders' assessments and decisions, and two, the significance of the economic, environmental, and/or social impact. Actually, it's imaginable that in the nearby future, a well-structured stakeholder analysis and subsequent materiality analysis will be required by new reporting standards. So, I can only advise that you start experimenting and testing both types of analysis soon. After identifying material topics and stakeholders, it's time to have a clear understanding of your company's impact and defining its baseline. This is really another no regret move because they say you can't manage what you don't measure. And that also counts for greenhouse gas emissions. So, there too, start measuring your baseline carbon footprint today. How? Well, by using the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which establishes comprehensive global standardized frameworks to measure and manage greenhouse gas emissions from private and public sector operations. You basically have three scopes. Scope 1 are all the emissions that are directly the result of own activities, such as emissions from own factories, trucks, and/or gas consumption. Think about gas boilers, combined heat and power installations, and ovens. Scope 2, on the other hand, are the indirect emissions, and those are from the energy purchased, for example, from an electricity company. The emissions then take place during the generation of the electricity. And last but not least, Scope 3. Those are all the other emissions from the company's activities, such as emissions from transport or production that has been outsourced or waste treatment. And exactly this Scope 3 is for many companies the majority of their emissions. But it's also the hardest one to tackle, and the scope which companies have the most challenges to calculate and report on. So my advice is to prioritize the easy wins. Tackle scope 1 and 2 first by, for example, making energy efficiency improvements such as switching energy suppliers to renewable energy contracts, and by tackling your company car fleet to plan for the switch to electric cars in the future, which will be mandatory in Belgium and the EU in the nearby future. Once you have a good understanding and control of scope 1 and 2, at that point you can start thinking about tackling the hardest one, scope 3. However, your impact will be limited if you don't collaborate with your inbound and outbound stakeholders. Think about suppliers, for instance. One way of truly understanding your value chain is leveraging a type of analysis called life cycle assessment, or LCA. An LCA is defined as a systemic analysis of the potential environmental impacts of products or services during their entire life cycle, which goes way beyond mere greenhouse gas emissions and includes other environmental inputs such as water usage, land usage, and so forth. This type of analysis gives you the opportunity to evaluate the potential environmental impacts throughout the entire life cycle, from production, distribution, usage, and end-of-life phases. This also includes the upstream and downstream processes associated with the production phase, the use phase, and disposal phase. Think about waste incineration. However, you can't truly understand your value chain if you focus solely on the environmental impacts. Assessing social considerations might uncover some serious human rights issues. Think about forced labor or governance risks such as bribery or corruption practices. I'm sure you don't want to be confronted with forced labor in your value chain without being aware or even transparent about it. This is exactly what happened to some companies recently when it got revealed that some of the raw materials were being sourced from the Xinjiang region in China, known for abusing Uyghur laborers. After you have identified the material topics, you've measured the baseline, you've looked at your value chain, it's time to set clear and robust targets. A great global framework for target setting is SBTI, which you can leverage for a solid scientific base, and once you share your plan with them, the scientists will take a look at it and hopefully approve it. Besides that, you need to set short-term and long-term targets, but start by focusing on the short-term targets. For this target setting, you can leverage the greenhouse gas analysis and LCA outcomes as the baseline for emissions and other environmental aspects. But don't forget to set targets on how you aim to improve the social and governance aspects of your business. And once you've got a grip on all your environmental, economic, governance, and social impacts, it's time to start monitoring the progress on those aspects. But monitoring without actions will not lead to anything. You should plan for dozens relevant, short-term, and impactful actions. And don't be afraid to experiment and be transparent on the progress. And progress, that's exactly the central word. This is a work in progress, and the time window is much larger than for the typical financial actions. Here, progress will be measured in years and decades, not financial quarters. One more thing, don't forget to celebrate the wins, as small steps are still progress in the right direction. Make sure regularly communicate proof of action. Frequent and consistent communication allows you to build an authentic voice on climate action. But be sure to be honest, human, and also reiterate the goals of your journey regularly. And don't forget that sustainability actions should aim to have a positive impact on and business benefit at the same time. We've come to the end of this webinar series, and I really want to thank you for subscribing. Personally, I'd love to hear about your ambitions and plans, so let me buy you your next coffee over a meaningful conversation. Make sure to reach out. Thank you.